Tonight, we will settle in and explore a quiet time. A time before the familiar shapes of coins and paper money. We will look at the simple beginnings of trade, when goods were exchanged directly from one person to another. This was the first economy, a system of pure and direct exchange. Imagine a small, early community. One person in this community is a farmer who grows grain. Another is a potter who makes sturdy clay pots. The grain farmer has a full harvest, with more wheat than their family can use. At the same time, they need a new pot to store water. The potter has just finished making several new pots, but their own supply of grain for making bread is low. Here, a direct exchange is possible. The two would meet, perhaps at a small gathering place or along a familiar path. They would examine the goods. The farmer would see the craftsmanship of the pot. The potter would feel the weight and quality of the grain. A quiet negotiation would then take place. How many baskets of wheat for one well-made pot? The value was not written down or fixed. It depended on the season, the immediate need, and the simple understanding between the two people. This system relied on a specific condition. Each person had to have something the other person wanted at the very same time. A fisher with a good catch could trade for firewood. A weaver with a warm blanket could trade for a pair of leather shoes. It worked well in small groups, where trust was established and needs were generally known. But this method also presented challenges. Sometimes, the potter did not need any grain. In that case, the farmer could not get a pot. Some items were also difficult to divide. A single large animal, for example, could not be easily traded for a few small tools. And some goods, like fresh fish or fruit, had to be exchanged quickly before they spoiled. So this earliest form of commerce was a direct one. An item for an item, a service for a service. Its value was determined in the moment through conversation and mutual agreement. It was a system that functioned entirely on physical objects and the immediate needs of the community. The world of direct trade was personal and straightforward. It was the first step in a long, slow journey toward more complex systems of value. For a long time, however, it was all that was needed. A simple exchange between two people to meet a simple need. We can now return to the quiet world of early trade. The system of direct exchange was personal and simple. But as communities grew larger and their needs became more varied, this system began to show its limitations. Its simplicity was also a source of gentle, persistent challenges. The most significant challenge was finding a perfect match. This is sometimes called the double coincidence of wants. It means that for a trade to happen, one person had to have exactly what the other person desired, and vice versa. Imagine a fisher who has a surplus of fish. She needs a new pair of shoes. She must find a shoemaker who not only has shoes to trade, but also happens to want fish on that particular day. If the shoemaker already has enough food, no trade can occur. The fisher would then have to find someone else, someone who wanted fish and had something the shoemaker might need. It created complex chains of searching and waiting. Another difficulty was the measure of value. With no standard unit, every single trade was a negotiation. How many clay pots was one wool blanket worth? How many bushels of barley was a strong axe worth? The answer would change from person to person, and from season to season. There was no simple way to know the price of something before the conversation began. Finally, there was the issue of division and storage. Some goods could not be easily divided. A farmer could not trade a small part of a live cow for a loaf of bread. And other goods, like fruit or milk, could not be saved for a long time. Their value was fleeting, and they had to be used or traded right away. So the world of barter was defined by three quiet hurdles: the need for a perfect match of wants, the absence of a common price, and the difficulty of dividing or storing certain goods. These were not sudden problems, but gentle frictions in the daily routine of life. These small, everyday challenges slowly encouraged people to think in new ways. They began to look for an intermediate step, something that could make the process of exchange a little smoother, a little more predictable. a new idea was quietly taking shape. Tonight, let us look more closely at the very heart of direct exchange. The entire system rested on a single, quiet principle. For a trade to proceed, both people had to want what the other person offered at the very same time. This simple alignment of needs was the foundation upon which all early trade was built. Imagine a weaver who has just finished a long roll of linen cloth. It is tightly woven and cool to the touch. Her family needs salt to preserve their food for the colder months. She takes her cloth to the local gathering place, hoping to find someone with salt to trade. Soon she finds a salt collector who has come from the coast with several heavy bags of coarse, gray salt. The salt collector admires the quality of the weaver's cloth, but his family does not need any linen. They are already well supplied for the season. What they do need is a strong new knife for their work. The weaver, of course, cannot make a knife, and so a direct trade cannot happen. The weaver's task now becomes more complex. She must find a third person. She needs to find a blacksmith who is in need of linen cloth. If she is successful, she can trade her cloth for a newly forged knife. Then, she can take that knife back to the salt collector. Only after this second step, this intermediate trade, can she finally acquire the salt her family needs. This process required patience. It depended on knowing the wants of others in the community. It also required a bit of luck. The blacksmith had to want cloth on the same day the weaver came to trade, and the salt collector still had to be in need of a knife when the weaver returned with it. The timing for everyone involved had to be just right. So, the engine of this early economy was a mutual desire, a shared and immediate need that had to connect two people directly. Without this perfect coincidence of wants, the flow of goods from one person to another would quietly pause. It was a system that worked, but it often moved in slow and indirect ways. Each exchange was a small puzzle to be solved. A calm and steady search for the right person, with the right goods, at exactly the right moment. This routine was a quiet, constant part of daily life, a rhythm of seeking and finding, or sometimes, of simply waiting for another day. Let us continue our quiet exploration of early trade. Even when a perfect match of wants was found, another gentle hurdle remained. This was the challenge of setting a fair price, when the items being exchanged were very different from one another. There was no common measure of value to guide the process. Imagine a skilled carpenter who has just finished a strong, handsome wooden table. It took many days of patient work. He needs a new cow for milk. He finds a farmer who is willing to trade a healthy young cow, but who does not need a table. The farmer needs several new sets of tools, a plow, and some repairs to his barn. The carpenter and the farmer must now find a way to express the value of the cow in terms of the carpenter's labor. How many hours of work would be equal to one cow? Would the work include the cost of the wood and the iron for the tools? They would have to discuss and agree upon every detail. Now, picture another trade. The same farmer takes another cow to trade with the potter. The potter offers a large collection of pots and jars in exchange. How many pots are equal to one cow? The answer is not simple. It depends on the size and quality of the pots, the health of the cow, and the needs of both people. The value of the cow, when measured in pots, would be completely different from its value measured in carpentry work. Every single transaction was its own unique calculation. It required a deep understanding of the labor, materials, and time invested in each item. So without a standard measure, establishing a price was a constant negotiation. The worth of any given item was not a fixed number, it was a floating value, changing with every new item it was compared against. It was a system of thousands of relative prices. This made trade a very deliberate and thoughtful process. It was a quiet and constant search for balance. A search for a simple, common language of value that everyone in a community could understand and agree upon, making each exchange a little bit easier. We can now turn our attention to the goods themselves. In the quiet system of direct trade, not all items were created equal. Some were durable and could last for many seasons, but many others were temporary, their value tied directly to the passage of time. Consider a farmer who has just harvested a large crop of ripe, sweet plums. They are perfect for only a few days. The farmer must find someone to trade with very quickly. Every day that passes, the plums soften and lose a little of their worth. After a week, they may have no value at all. The farmer's labor, all the work of tending the trees and gathering the fruit, could simply vanish. The same was true for a herder with fresh milk, or a fisher with their daily catch. Their wealth was perishable. It could not be stored away for a later time. They could not save the value of their work from one week to the next. This created a gentle urgency. They had to accept a trade that was available now, even if it was not the trade they truly wanted. In contrast, a toolmaker could create a set of stone axes. These axes would be just as useful a month, or even a year, later. Their value was stable. A potter's clay jars could hold their value just as well. This difference was important. It meant that some forms of wealth were secure, while others were as fleeting as a setting sun. So a key challenge in this early economy was the preservation of value. For many people, the fruits of their labor were temporary. Their work could not be easily saved or accumulated over time. The value was present one day and gone the next. This simple, natural fact created a need for something different. A need for a way to convert the temporary value of fresh plums or milk into a form that could endure. A way to hold on to the worth of a day's work, long after the day itself had passed. As people looked for ways to hold on to the value of their work, their attention turned to objects that could endure. The quiet challenge of perishable goods led to a search for items that did not fade with the passing days. This was the first, gentle step toward a new kind of economy. A fisher with a surplus of fish would understand that his catch needed to be traded by nightfall. If he could not find someone who wanted fish and had the shoes he needed, he might instead look for a different kind of trade. He could seek out someone with something durable, something that everyone in the community found useful. Perhaps he would trade his entire catch for a large bag of salt. He might not need that much salt himself, but he knew the salt would not spoil. It would hold its value. A week later, he could take a small portion of that salt and trade it for the shoes he originally wanted. In this way, the salt acted as an intermediate step. It became a way to store the value of his day's work. Different communities settled on different items. In agricultural lands, it was often grain. Measures of barley or wheat were durable, easy to divide, and always in demand. In other regions, it might be woven cloth or well-made metal tools. Certain types of seashells also became popular. Cowrie shells, for example. They were small, durable, and easy to carry. They were also not easy to find, which helped them keep a consistent value. So this was the first quiet solution to the problem of storing wealth. People began to accept certain durable items not for their immediate use, but because they trusted that others would accept them in a future trade. These objects served as a bridge through time. This was not a sudden invention. It was a slow, natural process, born from practical need. It was a gradual agreement within a community, a quiet consensus on which objects could be trusted to hold their worth, making trade a little more flexible and a little more secure. Let us now settle our minds on a simple yet profound aspect of early exchange. Even as durable goods like grain or salt began to make trade easier, a quiet difficulty remained. It was the problem of measurement. How could a community agree on the value of one thing compared to everything else? Imagine a marketplace in a small settlement. A carpenter has brought a well-made wooden stool to trade. He knows it took him 2 full days to make. But this personal measure of time and effort is not a price. To trade the stool, he must know its value in relation to every other item. So he learns that his stool is worth 3 chickens. It is also worth 1 large basket of dried fish, and it is worth 5 sturdy clay pots. There is no single price. The stool has many prices, a different one for every item it could be traded for. Now consider a farmer who wants the stool. She does not have chickens or fish. She has a roll of woolen cloth. She must first figure out the value of her cloth in terms of chickens or fish or pots. Perhaps one chicken is worth a certain length of her cloth. She would then need to calculate how much cloth is equal to 3 chickens. This created a complex web of mental calculations for every single trade. Each person had to keep a changing list of prices in their mind. A pot was worth a certain amount of grain. A knife was worth a certain number of pots. A blanket was worth a certain number of knives. The system worked, but it required constant, quiet effort. So the challenge was the absence of a common yardstick. Without a single shared unit to measure against, the value of every object was relative and fluid. It was a system of endless comparisons, making the process of exchange mentally demanding. This was not a problem that stopped trade. It was simply a part of the routine. But this constant need for calculation planted a seed. It created a quiet, unspoken desire for a simpler way. A way to give every item in the marketplace a single, stable price that everyone could understand. To solve the quiet puzzle of endless prices, a new idea began to form. It was not a sudden discovery, but a gradual shift in thinking. Communities began to settle on one single commodity to serve as a common measure for everything else. Let us return to the marketplace. In a farming community, that common item was often barley. Barley was durable, divisible, and familiar to everyone. So instead of pricing a wooden stool and chickens and fish and pots, the carpenter could give it a single price. A price in measures of barley. Perhaps his stool was worth 50 measures of barley. Now, anyone who approached him would understand its value. A person with chickens would know their chickens were also priced in barley. Maybe one healthy chicken was worth 15 measures. A person with pottery knew that a good pot was worth 10 measures. The actual barley did not even have to be exchanged. It simply provided a common language of value. The farmer with chickens could look at the stool priced at 50 measures of barley. She could look at her chickens priced at 15 measures each. She could then understand that a fair trade would be about 3 chickens for the stool, with a little something extra to make up the difference. The complex mental math was gone. The endless list of comparisons was replaced by one simple shared scale. So this conceptual leap created a unit of account. A single item was chosen to measure the value of all other items. It acted like a yardstick for the entire economy, making every transaction more transparent and straightforward. This silent agreement brought a new kind of order to the marketplace. It was a simple solution to a complex problem. By seeing all goods through the lens of one, the process of determining a fair price became a quiet and predictable routine. We can now see how a simple idea began to change the very rhythm of trade. When a community agreed on a single item to measure value, the next step happened naturally. That item began to be used not just for pricing, but for the exchange itself. This was the birth of what we now call commodity money. These were not yet coins, but rather everyday objects that everyone in a society agreed had a consistent worth. An item was chosen for this role because it had certain useful qualities. It needed to be durable, so it would not spoil or degrade over time. It needed to be portable, so it could be carried easily from one place to another. It was also helpful if it could be divided into smaller units, for smaller purchases. Most importantly, it had to be something that people generally desired for its own sake. In some inland societies, this item was salt, pressed into neat, transportable blocks. In farming regions, it was often grain, measured out in standard-sized baskets. In other parts of the world, cattle served this purpose, representing significant wealth, though they were not easily divided. Along coastal trade routes, small, uniform cowrie shells were often used. They were durable, lightweight, and difficult to counterfeit, making them a reliable medium of exchange. A person could now sell a basket of fruit for a handful of shells, not because they wanted the shells themselves, but because they knew that tomorrow, or next week, they could use those same shells to buy cloth, or a tool, or some pottery. So these chosen commodities became the first true medium of exchange. They were objects with their own inherent value that also served the practical function of money. They solved the old problem of needing a perfect match for every single trade. With these trusted objects, value could be stored, carried, and exchanged with a new sense of ease. The flow of goods became smoother, a quiet and steady current running through the heart of the community, connecting everyone in a shared system of value. Among the many objects used as early money, some were not small items held in the hand. In many societies, wealth was alive. It walked on four legs and grazed in the fields. For a long time, cattle served as a powerful and practical form of currency. In pastoral communities, a person's or a family's wealth was measured by the size of their herd. This made perfect sense. A cow or an ox was inherently valuable. It provided milk, leather, and meat. It could be used to plow fields, making it a source of future abundance. And unlike a bag of grain, this form of wealth could grow on its own. A healthy herd would produce calves, steadily increasing its owner's assets. When it came time for a significant transaction, cattle were the standard. A major purchase, such as a piece of land or an important social payment like a dowry, would be priced in a certain number of cows. The trade itself was a serious affair. The animals would be carefully inspected, their health and age assessed. The value was clear and tangible. You could see the wealth, standing right there in front of you. But this living money also had a significant limitation. It was not easily divisible. One could not use a small piece of a cow to buy a loaf of bread or a clay pot. This meant cattle were reserved for large-scale exchanges, the major transactions that defined a family's fortune. They were not practical for the small, everyday needs of the marketplace. So cattle represented a living, breathing form of wealth. They were a reliable store of value and a unit of account for life's most important exchanges. Their size and nature, however, made them unsuitable for daily commerce. This quiet reality meant that even in societies that counted their wealth in livestock, there was still a need for something else. A need for a smaller, more convenient form of currency to handle the simple, routine exchanges of daily life. In the great agricultural societies that grew along fertile rivers, a different kind of commodity money took hold. While cattle were a measure of great wealth, they were not suited for everyday transactions. For the small, routine exchanges of daily life, people turned to the very foundation of their existence. They turned to grain. Barley and wheat were central to these early civilizations. A successful harvest meant life and prosperity. It was natural, then, that grain became a standard for value. Unlike a living cow, grain was perfectly divisible. It could be measured out in any amount, from a small handful to buy a piece of fruit, to large sacks to purchase a tool. Official, standardized volumes were created. In ancient Sumeria, a common measure was the sila, a clay bowl that held roughly 1 liter. This simple tool ensured that everyone was using the same unit. A worker's daily wage could be paid as a set number of sila of barley. Taxes could be collected in grain and stored in vast temple granaries. These granaries were the first banks, holding the collective wealth of the city. The value of grain was understood by everyone because everyone depended on it for sustenance. It was a currency you could eat. It was durable, as long as it was kept dry, and it was relatively easy to transport in sacks or jars. So in these settled farming communities, grain became the great regulator of the economy. It served as a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and a store of value. It was a practical solution, born directly from the rhythm of the harvest. This system brought a quiet predictability to economic life. It was a system rooted in the earth itself. The value of a day's labor, or a craftsman's skill, could be expressed in the simple, life-sustaining substance of a single, humble grain. With grain acting as money, and great quantities of it stored in central granaries, a new and quiet challenge presented itself. It was the challenge of memory. How could a society keep an accurate and trusted record of all these deposits and withdrawals? The answer was found not in grain, but in clay. When a farmer brought a portion of their harvest to the temple granary, They would not simply leave it there. A scribe would be present to record the transaction. The scribe would take a piece of soft, wet clay, shaping it into a small, smooth tablet. Using a sharpened reed as a stylus, they would press symbols into the clay. These symbols would record the essential details: a mark for the farmer's name, another for the date, and a set of marks indicating the exact amount of barley or wheat deposited. This clay tablet was then set in the sun to dry, or baked in a kiln to make it hard and permanent. It became an official receipt, a physical proof of the wealth stored within the granary walls. This simple process created a system of trust, but it also allowed for a remarkable innovation. Instead of withdrawing the heavy grain to make a purchase, a person could simply hand over their baked clay tablet. The tablet was a claim on the grain. It represented that value. The recipient could then take the tablet to the granary at any time to collect their grain. Or they could use that same tablet to pay someone else. So a system of written ledgers was born. These clay tablets were the first contracts, the first records of credit and debt. For many transactions, the physical grain never moved at all. Only the written claim to it changed hands, making commerce lighter and more efficient. For the very first time, value began to separate from the physical object itself. It could now exist as a simple, quiet promise, pressed into a humble piece of clay. It was a system built not just on grain, but on the steady foundation of trust and record-keeping. While grain was the currency of settled lands, trade did not stop at the edge of the fields. Quiet, well-worn paths connected distant communities. And for this long-distance trade, grain was often too heavy and too bulky. A different kind of commodity was needed, something with high value in a small, portable package. One of the most important of these was simple, crystalline salt. In a world without refrigeration, salt was far more than just a seasoning. It was a vital strategic resource. It allowed people to preserve meat and fish, storing food for lean times or long journeys. It was also a necessary part of the human diet. But salt was not found everywhere. It was a regional resource, gathered from coastal salt pans or mined from the earth in specific locations. This scarcity in some areas and abundance in others made it a perfect item for trade. Those who produced salt would form it into solid, standardized blocks or cakes. These blocks were sturdy and relatively easy to transport. A single animal in a caravan could carry a significant amount of wealth in the form of these salt blocks. A trader could begin a journey with a cargo of salt and travel for weeks or months. Along the way, they could break off small pieces of a salt block to pay for food, water, or safe passage. When they reached a distant land where salt was rare and precious, they could trade their remaining blocks for local goods, like exotic spices, fine textiles, or durable metals. So because it was universally needed, easily divisible, and simple to carry, salt became a key to unlocking long-distance commerce. It was a durable form of money that could flow steadily along the quiet, dusty trade routes that stitched the ancient world together. These salt routes were the arteries of a wider economy. Along them, a simple, essential substance moved slowly and deliberately from a place of plenty to a place of need. And in doing so, it carried value, connecting different peoples and their unique skills. As we have seen, different societies chose different objects to serve as money. Whether it was grain, salt, or shells, these items were not chosen by chance. They each possessed a special set of quiet characteristics that made them suitable for the slow and steady work of commerce. For an object to function well as money, it first had to be durable. It needed to withstand the passage of time without spoiling or breaking down. A bag of salt or a handful of shells would hold their form for years, preserving their value. A basket of fresh figs would not. Next, it needed to be portable. A person had to be able to carry their wealth with them easily. This is why small, lightweight objects like cowrie shells were so effective for traders, while a heavy millstone, though valuable, could never become currency. The object also needed to be divisible. It had to be easily broken down into smaller parts to pay for less expensive items. A sack of barley could be divided into thousands of individual grains for small purchases. A single cow, however, could not be divided without losing most of its value. Another important quality was uniformity. Each unit of the money had to be more or less the same as every other unit. This made counting and pricing simple and fair. One scoop of barley was trusted to be the same as the next. Finally, and most importantly, it had to have general acceptability. Everyone in the community had to agree to accept it as payment. This was a matter of shared trust and social convention, so the things that became money shared a few simple traits. They were lasting, easy to carry, simple to divide, consistent in quality, and trusted by all. These practical qualities determined which commodities would rise to serve as a medium of exchange. While these items served their purpose well for a very long time, people began to notice that one particular class of materials possessed all of these useful properties to an even greater degree. A new chapter in our story was quietly beginning to unfold. Tonight, let us turn our attention to one of the most successful and widespread forms of early money. It was not a metal, nor a grain, but a small, smooth object, born from the sea. For thousands of years, the cowrie shell served as a trusted currency across vast parts of the world. The specific shell used was from a sea snail found mainly in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. From these shores, the shells would begin a long, slow journey. They were collected, cleaned, and packed into bags or baskets. Traders would then carry them along sea routes and overland caravan paths, into the heart of Africa and across Asia. Their success as money came from their unique physical properties. They were small and lightweight, easy to carry in a pouch or on a string. They were incredibly durable, with a hard, porcelain-like surface that resisted wear and damage. Unlike grain, they would not spoil. Unlike salt, they would not dissolve. They were also naturally uniform. Each shell was very similar in size and shape to the next, making them easy to count and difficult to fake. For small purchases, a few loose shells would be exchanged. For larger amounts, they were often strung together into long strands of 100 or 1,000 shells, creating a standardized unit for bigger transactions. So the humble cowrie shell possessed all the ideal qualities for an early currency. It was portable, long-lasting, consistent, and secure from counterfeiting. Its value was based on its natural scarcity and the effort required to transport it from the ocean to inland markets. For centuries, these small, quiet shells passed from hand to hand. They were a simple, elegant solution provided by the natural world, a gentle currency that connected countless people in a widespread and stable network of trade. Let us now look more closely at why shell money was so effective. The commodities used as money before it, like cattle or grain, each had their own quiet limitations. The cowrie shell provided a simple and elegant answer to two of the most persistent challenges in early commerce. These were the problems of portability and divisibility. First, there was the matter of portability. A person's wealth, if it was held in livestock or sacks of barley, was heavy and difficult to move. This was not a problem for local exchanges, but it made long-distance trade a slow and laborious process. Shells, however, were almost weightless. A trader could carry thousands of them in a single leather pouch. This meant that a significant amount of value could be transported easily and discreetly over great distances. Wealth became something personal and mobile, something that could travel with a person wherever they went. Then there was the challenge of divisibility. A farmer could not trade a small part of a living ox for a loaf of bread. Grain could be divided, but measuring out tiny amounts for very small purchases was often impractical. Shells solved this perfectly. Each individual shell had a very small but consistent value. This allowed for a level of precision in pricing that was difficult to achieve before. One could pay for a piece of fruit with just a few shells. A day's labor could be paid with a specific, countable number of shells. It brought the same logic of the marketplace to the smallest transactions of daily life. So the cowrie shell's success came from these two simple virtues. It was light enough to make wealth portable, and it was small enough to make any price payable. It created a more fluid and granular economy, from the largest caravan deals down to the smallest village purchase. The quiet clinking of shells passing from one hand to another became the sound of a more flexible system of exchange. It was a system that could measure the value of both a large shipment of goods and a single cup of water with equal ease. The systems of commodity money, from grain to salt to shells, brought a new and quiet order to the world of trade. They served their purpose well for a very long time, yet even these trusted objects carried within them a gentle, inherent instability. Their value was not always constant, and their quality was not always the same. Let us first consider the matter of quality. When barley was used as money, not all barley was equal. A measure of grain from a good harvest, grown in rich soil and stored carefully, was clean and full. But a measure from a poor harvest might contain smaller kernels, or be mixed with bits of chaff or stone. This meant that every transaction required a small, quiet moment of inspection. A potter selling a jar would have to look closely at the grain being offered. Is it dry? Is it free of pests? This brought a small element of doubt and negotiation back into what was meant to be a simple process. The same was true for salt. Some blocks were purer and whiter than others. The currency was not perfectly uniform. The second challenge was the inconsistency of supply. The value of commodity money was tied directly to its abundance in the natural world. In a year with a great barley harvest, the granaries would be overflowing. With so much money available, its value would gently fall. It might take more barley than the year before to buy the same wool blanket. Conversely, a year of drought would make barley scarce and therefore more valuable. A single measure might buy much more than it had before. This fluctuation made long-term planning difficult. So this early money was subject to the rhythms of nature. Its worth could rise and fall with the rain, and its quality could differ from one handful to the next. The system worked, but it was not perfectly stable or predictable. This gentle uncertainty created a quiet desire for something better, a form of money that was completely separate from the harvest or the tides. A medium of exchange whose value and quality could be guaranteed every single time. The quiet uncertainties of commodity money, its value tied to harvests and seasons, led people to seek something more constant. A new kind of object began to take on the role of money, one whose worth was not based on its daily use, but on something more abstract. This slow and gradual shift began with metals. For a long time, copper, silver, and gold were simply desirable materials. They were used to make durable tools, beautiful ornaments, and important ceremonial objects. But these metals also possessed all the ideal qualities of money to a very high degree. They were almost perfectly durable, never spoiling or decaying. They were naturally scarce, which meant their supply was much more stable than that of grain. And they were perfectly divisible. A piece of silver could be cut into smaller and smaller pieces, and its value would be divided just as cleanly. Over time, people began to accept these metals not because they planned to make something with them, but simply because they trusted that anyone else would also accept them in a future trade. A merchant traveling between towns might carry a small, unmarked lump of silver in a leather pouch. To buy a meal, he would snip off a tiny piece with a chisel. This small piece would then be placed on one side of a handheld balance scale. On the other side, tiny standardized stone weights would be added until the beam was perfectly level. The value of the silver was determined purely by its weight, so a profound but quiet change was taking place. The value of an object used as money was slowly separating from its practical function. A piece of silver was no longer just raw material for a future bracelet. It was becoming an object whose primary purpose was simply to represent value itself. This new system, based on weighing raw metal, brought a higher level of stability and precision to trade. But the routine of carrying scales and cutting and weighing metal for every small purchase was a slow and deliberate process. The stage was being set for one last, simple innovation. As the use of metal for exchange became more common, two particular metals began to stand out from all the others. Gold and silver, with their quiet, gentle gleam, possessed a unique combination of qualities. These qualities made them especially suited to become the foundation for a new kind of money. Their first and most important quality was their permanence. Unlike other commodities, gold and silver do not rust, tarnish, or decay. A piece of silver, passed from hand to hand over many years, would remain essentially unchanged. This exceptional durability meant they were a truly reliable way to store value over long periods of time. They were also naturally scarce. The total amount of gold or silver in the world was limited, and it increased only slowly and with great effort through mining. This made their value far more stable than that of grain, which could be abundant one year and scarce the next. Furthermore, these metals were dense. A small, heavy piece of gold held the same value as a large, cumbersome sack of grain or a heavy block of salt. This meant a great deal of wealth could be carried easily and securely in a small pouch, making long-distance trade much simpler. And finally, they were uniform and divisible. A gram of pure gold from one part of the world is identical to a gram of pure gold from any other. It could be melted down and reformed, or cut into tiny pieces, with no loss of its essential quality or worth. So it was this rare combination of traits that made them so trusted. They were permanent, their supply was stable, they concentrated great value into a small space, and they were perfectly consistent in their nature. They answered all the quiet challenges that other forms of money had presented. For these reasons, gold and silver became the ultimate materials for storing wealth and making significant payments. They were the quiet standard against which other things were measured. The routine of trade was becoming more refined, more predictable, and more secure. Before the creation of familiar, round coins, the use of precious metals in trade took on many simple, practical forms. The process of cutting and weighing small, irregular pieces of silver and gold for every purchase was slow and cumbersome. And so, a quiet and logical refinement began to take place. Metalsmiths started to produce metal in more standardized, convenient shapes. Instead of shapeless lumps, they cast silver and gold into uniform bars, rods, or rings. These forms were easier to handle and to store. Small bars could be stacked neatly in a chest. Rings and bracelets could be worn on the arm, making a person's wealth both secure and portable. In some ancient societies, like Egypt, metal rings of a standard weight became a common sight in the marketplace. A person making a payment could simply remove a ring and offer it for the goods. However, this was not yet a complete solution. While the shapes were becoming more consistent, there was still no official guarantee of the metal's weight or purity. For any significant transaction, the scales would still be brought out. The ring or bar would be placed on one side, and the familiar stone weights on the other, just to be sure. It was a system built on convenience, but still grounded in the physical reality of the metal's intrinsic worth, measured at the moment of exchange. So the first step away from raw metal was to shape it into regular, predictable forms. Rings, bars, and rods made the process of exchange smoother and more orderly. But trust was not yet built into the object itself. The final confirmation of value still came from the simple, honest balance of a scale. This routine of weighing and checking was reliable, but it was also slow. It was the last small friction in the system of exchange. And the solution to this final, quiet challenge was just over the horizon, waiting to be discovered. Before the first coins were ever struck, a quiet and elegant instrument was the center of every important transaction. When value was measured in raw metal, trust was not placed in a stamp or a promise, but in the steady, impartial judgment of the balance scale. Imagine a small, bustling marketplace. A trader wishes to purchase a fine ceramic jar. He offers a small, irregular piece of silver as payment. The potter nods, and from a wooden box he takes out his scale. It is a simple, elegant device. A central post with a perfectly balanced horizontal beam. From each end of the beam, a small, shallow pan hangs by a delicate cord. The whole apparatus is held up by hand with great steadiness. The trader places his piece of silver into one of the empty pans. It dips down immediately with a soft clink. Then the potter carefully, and with practiced hands, begins to place small polished stone weights into the other pan. These are not just any stones, they are his trusted weights. Each one has a known standard weight, perhaps certified by a local authority. He adds them one by one. A small one, then another, even a tiny sliver of a weight. The beam rises slowly, swaying gently back and forth. Both men, and perhaps a few curious onlookers, watch the small needle at the center of the beam. When the needle settles and points perfectly straight, when the two pans hang in perfect, motionless equilibrium, the transaction is complete. The weight, and therefore the value of the silver has been proven. There is no need for argument or debate. The scale has provided a quiet, visual truth that all parties can accept without a word. And so, this simple tool was the absolute foundation of fairness in metal-based trade. The balance scale was an arbiter, removing doubt and personal opinion from the exchange. It transformed the value of an object from a matter of subjective negotiation into a matter of objective, physical fact, visible to all. It was the silent, trusted third party present in every single deal. This constant ritual of weighing became a deliberate rhythm in the world of commerce, a slow and careful dance of metal and stone, repeated thousands of times each day in marketplaces across the known world. It was a truly dependable system, but one that required patience and a set of trusted weights at every turn. A final, simple step was needed to make this process even quieter, and to remove the need for the scale altogether. For the balanced scale to work perfectly, another quiet agreement was needed. It was an agreement not about the metal itself, but about the small, polished stones used to weigh it. This was the gradual creation of standard units of weight. In the early days of weighing metal, each merchant might have their own personal set of weights. They trusted them, and those they traded with often would come to trust them as well. But a merchant in one town might use a set of weights based on the weight of a single uniform seed. A merchant in a different town might use a standard based on a different seed, or a different object entirely. This created small, persistent inconsistencies. For trade to flow smoothly between different places, a common language of weight was required. To solve this, ruling authorities like kings or temple officials began to create and enforce official standards. A master set of weights was established, often carved from a durable stone like hematite, and kept in a secure, public place. A merchant could bring their personal weights to be checked against these masters. If they were accurate, they might receive a small official mark, a sign of their trustworthiness. Over time, these standards were given names. One of the most well-known early standards was the shekel. It was not a coin, but a specific, recognized unit of weight, roughly 11 grams. Other units, like the mina, were simply a collection of shekels, perhaps 60 of them. So the idea of value became more uniform and more abstract. A shekel of silver was a shekel of silver, whether it was being weighed in a busy port city or a quiet mountain village. The shared system of measurement created a wider circle of trust. With a standard weight now agreed upon, the process of exchange was more reliable than ever before. The next logical step was to create pieces of metal that already had a standard guaranteed weight, removing the need to weigh them at all. Tonight, our quiet journey takes us to a specific place in the ancient world, a kingdom in western Anatolia known as Lydia. It was a prosperous land, situated along important trade routes. But Lydia also possessed a unique natural gift, a gift that flowed quietly through its rivers and streams. This local resource would set the stage for the final, simple step in the long evolution of money. In Lydia, there flowed a river named Pactolus. As this river wound its way through the land, it carried with it tiny flecks and small, water-worn nuggets of a pale lemon-yellow metal. This substance was a natural alloy, a blend of gold and silver that occurred together in the earth. The Lydians called it electrum. For centuries, people would gather this metal from the riverbeds using a simple and patient process. They would sift through the sand and gravel, collecting the small, heavy pieces that settled at the bottom of their pans. Each piece was unique, an irregular shape polished smooth by the water. And the blend of gold and silver in each nugget was not always the same. Some pieces were more golden, while others were more silvery. The Lydians had a ready and abundant supply of this precious metal, but its value was still determined by weighing it on a scale, just as it was everywhere else. So the streams of this ancient kingdom provided a steady, local source of a valuable metal. This electrum, a simple and natural mix of gold and silver, was collected in small, irregular lumps directly from the river. Its composition was inconsistent, but its presence was constant. Having this material in such abundance presented the Lydians with a quiet opportunity. They had the raw material, and they had the need for a more efficient system of trade. All the necessary elements for a new idea were slowly coming together, as gently as the river flowing through their land. Tonight, we can look more closely at this pale golden metal called electrum. Its presence in the rivers of Lydia was a simple fact of local geography, but this naturally occurring alloy also possessed a unique set of properties that made it the perfect material for the world's first true coins. The most important of these properties was its simple durability. Pure gold is a very soft metal. A piece of pure gold can be easily bent in the hands or scratched with a fingernail. Pure silver is also quite soft. This meant that if they were used for daily exchange, they would slowly wear down, losing tiny particles of their weight with every transaction. Electrum, however, being a natural mix of the two, is noticeably harder and more resistant to this daily wear. This made it a much better material for an object that was meant to be passed from hand to hand, day after day. It would hold its shape and its weight for a much longer time. The metal also had a clear and accepted intrinsic value. As a blend of two universally prized metals, it was already seen as a reliable way to store wealth. It did not need to be assigned a value, it simply had one. And for the Lydians, this valuable material was locally abundant. They did not need to organize long and difficult trade missions to acquire it. The supply was steady and close at hand, gathered from their own riverbeds. The one quiet challenge was the inconsistent quality of the natural electrum. A nugget found in one part of the river might have a higher gold content than one found further downstream. But this problem held the seed of its own solution. An authority, like the king, could collect all the raw metal, melt it down in a crucible, and create large batches with a consistent, standardized blend of gold and silver. So this material was ideal for a few quiet, practical reasons. It was physically harder than its pure components. It was already considered valuable on its own. And it was readily available to be controlled and standardized by a central authority. These simple qualities made it the perfect candidate for a new form of money. The stage was now perfectly set. The Lydians had the right material, in the right place at the right time. All that was needed was a simple, visible way to certify its value, once and for all, so that the scales would no longer be needed for every exchange. The quiet ritual of weighing metal brought fairness to the marketplace. But it was a slow and deliberate process, requiring care, patience, and a trusted set of scales for every exchange. A simpler way was needed, and it emerged not as a sudden invention, but as a gradual and practical refinement of this very routine. The first step was to move away from using irregular, shapeless lumps of metal. Instead of a merchant having to chisel off a small piece of silver from a larger bar for a minor purchase, a new practice began. Trusted metalsmiths, or perhaps officials in a temple or palace, would take a large quantity of electrum or silver. They would melt it down in a hot crucible until it was a single, molten pool of consistent quality. Then, they would pour this liquid metal into a series of small, identical molds. When the metal cooled, it would form a collection of small, standardized pellets or bean-shaped ingots. Each one was carefully crafted to have the same, specific weight. Perhaps a stater, or a third of a stater, or an even smaller fraction for minor transactions. Now, a person could carry a pouch of these pre-weighed pieces. When it was time to make a purchase, they could simply count out the required number of pellets. The slow process of cutting and weighing was no longer necessary for every single trade. It made commerce faster and much more convenient. This was a quiet but significant shift. The focus was moving from raw material to a manufactured object. It was the moment when pieces of metal were first created for the specific and sole purpose of being money. The shape itself began to signify a standard measure of value. These small, unmarked pellets were the direct ancestors of the coin. They solved the problem of weight. But one final piece of the puzzle was missing. There was still no absolute guarantee of the metal's purity or of the authority that stood behind its value. A final seal of trust was needed. The small uniform pellets of metal made trade faster. They had a standard weight, removing the need for scales in every transaction. But a quiet question still remained in the back of the mind. How could a person be sure that the pale yellow pellet was truly electrum, and not a cheaper metal with a similar appearance? The answer came in the form of a simple, forceful act. The authority that created these standardized pellets, perhaps a wealthy merchant or a temple administrator, needed a way to guarantee their product. So after a batch of metal was tested and its quality was confirmed, each individual pellet would be marked. A metal die engraved with a simple pattern would be placed against the soft metal. Then it would be struck hard with a hammer. This forceful blow would leave a deep, clear impression on the surface of the pellet. These first marks were not elaborate. They were often just a series of rough lines, or a simple geometric shape, like a square. This mark was not a decoration. It was a seal of authenticity. It was a silent promise from the issuer, a guarantee that the metal was of a known and trusted purity. So, this simple punch mark was a profound innovation. It transferred the burden of trust from the person receiving the metal to the authority that issued it. It was a visible signature, a quiet declaration that the object's composition could be relied upon. The value was no longer just in the metal itself, but also in the symbol pressed into its surface. With these marked pieces of metal, the final elements of a coin were now in place. A standardized weight was combined with a guaranteed purity, certified by a trusted mark. The only thing left was for this practice to be adopted by the highest authority in the land, transforming a private guarantee into a public one for all to see and accept. Even as societies began to use pre-weighed pieces of metal, a final and very quiet hurdle remained. The balance scale could confirm the weight of a piece of silver, but it could say nothing about its quality. This was the gentle, persistent problem of purity. Imagine a merchant receiving a small, unmarked pellet of electrum as payment. It might have the correct weight, but how could he be certain of its contents? It was possible for a less honest smith to mix in cheaper metals, like lead or copper, creating an alloy that looked correct but contained less of the precious gold and silver. To guard against this, an expert would need to test the metal. The most common method used a special tool called a touchstone. This was a small, flat tablet of a hard, black stone with a fine-grained surface. The merchant would take the piece of metal in question and rub it firmly against the stone, leaving a small, colored streak. Then, he would take out a set of small needles made of alloys of a known, trusted purity. He would rub the needle that he believed was the closest match to the pellet right next to the first streak. By comparing the exact color and luster of the two streaks side by side, an experienced eye could make a very accurate judgment of the metal's quality. This process was a quiet and skillful art. It required good light, a steady hand, and years of practice. So the final guarantee of value was not yet built into the money itself. It rested on a moment of careful, expert inspection. Every significant transaction involving unmarked metal required this slow and deliberate ritual to ensure that the payment was truly what it appeared to be. This last element of uncertainty, this need for a personal, hands-on verification, was the final problem to be solved. The entire system of commerce was waiting for a way to make trust in the metal's purity as simple and as absolute as the confirmation of its weight on a scale. The quiet ritual of testing metal with a touchstone was reliable, but it was also personal and slow. It depended on the skill of an individual. For trade to become truly fluid, a universal and immediate form of trust was needed. This final, simple solution came when the guarantee was no longer made by a private merchant, but by the highest authority in the land. In Lydia, the king's administration took over the entire process of making money. The electrum collected from the rivers was no longer traded as raw nuggets. Instead, it was brought to a central workshop, a place of order and precision. Here, large batches of the metal were melted in crucibles over hot fires, refined and mixed, until the blend of gold and silver was perfectly consistent. This standardized metal was then poured and formed into small, blank pellets, each one carefully weighed to match an official standard. Now came the final, defining step. A blank pellet would be placed on a solid anvil. On top, a die made of hardened metal was positioned. This die was engraved with an official symbol, an image that everyone in the kingdom would recognize, such as the head of a lion. A worker would then strike the die with a single, forceful blow from a heavy hammer. This act impressed the royal symbol deep into the soft metal. This was more than just a mark. It was the king's seal, a public promise. It was a guarantee to all who saw it that the piece contained a specific weight of metal at a specific, verified purity. So the official stamp was a quiet revolution. It combined the guarantee of weight and the guarantee of quality into one single, easily recognizable image. The need for scales and touchstones simply melted away. Trust was no longer a matter of slow, personal inspection. It was now instant, public, and backed by the authority of the kingdom itself. With this simple process, the first true coin was created. A small, durable object carrying a promise that could be understood and accepted by anyone, without doubt or delay. Commerce was now free to move at the speed of simple, visual recognition. Tonight we arrive at a quiet turning point in our story. In the ancient kingdom of Lydia, around 600 years before the Common Era, all the separate threads of our journey came together. The Lydians took the final, simple step, and in doing so, created the world's very first system of standardized, state-issued coinage. The process was a model of quiet efficiency. It began with the pale, golden electrum gathered from the local rivers. This raw material was brought to a royal mint, a workshop under the direct control of the king. Here the metal was refined to a consistent quality and cast into small, bean-shaped blanks of a precise, standard weight. The largest of these was called a stater, and it served as the basic unit. Smaller fractions, like a third, a sixth, and even a 24th of a stater, were also produced for smaller transactions. Now, each blank was ready to receive its official mark. The blank was placed on a metal anvil. A hardened die, engraved with a symbol of royal authority, most often the head of a roaring lion, was placed on top. The reverse side was simply marked with a rough punch. A single heavy hammer blow drove the lion's image deep into the metal. This was not just a picture. It was a seal of state. It was a clear and public guarantee from the king himself. This coin, the Lydian lion, was a promise that the piece of metal was of a specific weight and a known, consistent purity. So, for the first time, a government took full responsibility for the quality and value of its money. The coin was a physical embodiment of a public trust. The need for weighing and testing was gone. A person could accept a Lydian lion with complete confidence, simply by recognizing the familiar stamp of the king. This simple, elegant solution made commerce faster, easier, and more secure than ever before. It was an idea so practical and so powerful that it would soon begin a quiet journey of its own, spreading from Lydia out into the wider world and changing the very nature of trade forever. The creation of the Lydian coin was more than a simple convenience. The small stamp of the lion was a quiet but profound statement. It represented the moment when the state itself stepped in to become the final and most trusted guarantor of money's value. Before this innovation, trust in the marketplace was a personal and fragmented affair. A person had to trust the merchant who was weighing the metal. They had to trust the accuracy of the scales. They had to trust their own skill in judging the metal's purity with a touchstone. Even when private merchants began to stamp their own metal pellets, that stamp was only as good as the merchant's individual reputation. It was a personal promise, valid only as far as that person was known and respected. The Lydian king's seal changed everything. His stamp was not a personal promise. It was an official, public declaration. It was a guarantee that was recognized and enforced throughout the entire kingdom. The authority of the state replaced the need for individual judgment. A farmer from a remote village and a wealthy merchant in the capital city could look at the very same coin and feel the exact same confidence in its worth. They did not need to know or trust each other. They only needed to recognize the familiar symbol of the lion and trust the institution that it represented. So the role of guaranteeing value shifted from the individual to the state. The coin became an object of universal trust, its worth backed not by a person but by the collective authority of the entire kingdom. The value was no longer just in the metal, but in the promise stamped upon it. This was the final, crucial step in our long journey. Money was now fully formed, a perfect tool for exchange. It was portable, durable, divisible, and now its value was universally guaranteed. The quiet, steady foundation for all future economies was now firmly in place. Let us now take a closer look at the physical object itself. The first true coin from the Kingdom of Lydia was not a perfect circle, nor was it intricately detailed like the currency we know today. It was a simple, functional object born entirely of practical need. These early coins were small, thick, and somewhat irregular in shape, often resembling a lumpy bean or a flattened pellet. This was a natural result of the simple manufacturing process. A blank of pre-weighed electrum, still warm and soft, was placed on a solid surface. The official die engraved with the image of a lion's head was then pressed onto the top of the blank. This was the front, or the obverse of the coin. The image of the lion was the state's guarantee. To create a clear impression, this die had to be struck with great force. To achieve this, a simple tool, a rough metal punch, was held against the back of the blank. When the hammer came down, it drove the die into the front of the coin, while at the same time, the punch on the back left its own deep, rough impression. This mark on the back, or the reverse, was not a design. It was simply a functional byproduct of the minting process. Most often it was a simple, deep square or rectangular indentation, sometimes divided into smaller sections by the shape of the punch. So this very first coin carried two distinct marks. On one face, it bore the clear and deliberate symbol of royal authority. On the other, it carried the simple functional impression of the tool that was used to create it. It was an object that told the quiet story of its own making. These humble coins, with their rough edges and their simple, powerful designs, were a complete and elegant solution. They were money, reduced to its most essential form. A guaranteed weight of a precious metal, held in the palm of a hand. Let us now consider the true power of that simple stamped image. The lion's head on a Lydian coin was more than just a symbol of the king. It was the final piece of a puzzle that had taken centuries to solve. This small, official mark fundamentally changed the idea of trust, transforming it from a slow and personal negotiation into an instant and public certainty. Before the stamped coin, every exchange of metal was its own quiet ritual. A merchant would present a small lump of silver. The shopkeeper would pause, retrieve their handheld scale, and carefully place the metal in one pan. Then, the slow, deliberate process of adding small stone weights to the other would begin until the beam hung in perfect balance. A further test with a touchstone might follow, a careful streak of metal on black rock to confirm its purity. Trust had to be built from scratch in that moment, through a shared, visible process between two people. The stamped coin made this entire ceremony unnecessary. When a person was offered a Lydian stater, the transaction became one of simple recognition. There was no need for scales. There was no need for a touchstone. The presence of the official lion symbol was a complete guarantee in itself. It was a clear and public promise from the highest authority that the coin's weight and purity were correct. This allowed for a new kind of commerce, one that could happen quickly and anonymously, between strangers who had never met. The trust was no longer in the person across from you, but in the distant, reliable institution of the state that backed the currency. And so, the stamp on the coin was a quiet revolution in human interaction. It shifted the foundation of trust from a slow, manual verification between individuals to a quick, visual recognition of a shared authority. The coin itself became the embodiment of a promise, a small piece of metal that carried with it the full faith and credit of the kingdom. It was a physical object that held an abstract idea. This simple solution allowed the rhythm of the marketplace to quicken. Exchanges became more fluid, and the quiet friction of doubt was smoothed away. The long, patient journey from direct barter to a system of pure trust had reached its calm and logical conclusion, resting in the palm of a hand. The world of commerce was now ready to expand in ways that were previously unimaginable. The stamped coin was a simple and elegant solution to the problem of trust. A single glance at the king's seal was enough to guarantee a piece of metal's worth. But the daily life of the marketplace required more than just one type of coin. A large, high-value coin was not practical for buying a loaf of bread or a handful of olives. And so, another quiet and logical innovation soon followed. The royal mint in Lydia did not produce just one kind of coin. It created a whole family of them, a system of related values. The largest and most valuable coin was the stater. It was the standard unit, used for significant purchases. At the same time, the mint also produced smaller coins, each one a precise and simple fraction of the stater. There were coins worth 1/3 of a stater, and others worth 1/6. There were even tiny coins, some as small as 1/96 of the main unit, for the most minor of daily transactions. Each of these smaller coins was made from the same guaranteed electrum, and each was stamped with its own version of the royal lion symbol. This created a clear and predictable relationship between them. A person knew, without needing to think, that 3 1/3 stater coins were exactly equal to 1 full stater. The complex problem of making change was now a simple matter of counting. There was no more need to cut a piece of silver in half, or to find a balance scale to weigh the pieces. The value was already divided into neat, convenient, and trusted units. So this was the creation of the first true monetary system, with different denominations for different needs. The value of each coin was fixed and known in relation to all the others. It was a complete and flexible tool for commerce, from the largest deals to the smallest purchases. A person could now go to the market with a small pouch containing a few coins of different sizes. They could carry with them the means to conduct any kind of transaction, with a quiet confidence that their money would be accepted, and that the value of each piece was simple, clear, and understood by all. Tonight, let us settle our minds on the quiet, practical elegance of a system with different coin sizes. The creation of denominations was not just about making small purchases possible, it also brought a new and profound simplicity to the very act of thinking about value. Imagine a world just before this system. A merchant sells a large roll of woven cloth for 1 heavy bar of silver. He then needs to buy a small amount of oil. The oil seller asks for only a tiny fraction of that silver bar in payment. The merchant now has a problem. He must find a sharp chisel and a hammer, and carefully cut a small sliver from his bar. Then he must find a set of scales to weigh that sliver, hoping it is the correct amount. The process is slow, imprecise, and it damages the large, handsome bar. Now imagine the same transaction in Lydia, just a short time later. The merchant sells his cloth for a set number of large silver stater coins. He then goes to the oil seller, who asks for a price of one small 24th stater coin. The merchant simply reaches into his pouch, selects one of the tiny, pre-made coins, and hands it over. The transaction is instant. The mental calculation of value is no longer a difficult problem of division. It is a simple act of counting. Every item in the marketplace, from a ship's cargo to a single apple, could now be given a clear, understandable price and a specific number of coins. So, the system of denominations transformed the mathematics of trade. It replaced the difficult, physical act of dividing raw material with the simple, abstract act of counting standardized units. This made commerce accessible to everyone, not just those with the specialized tools and skills to cut and weigh metal. The marketplace became a quieter, more orderly place. The constant, small sounds of hammers on chisels and the gentle swaying of balanced scales were replaced by the soft, simple clinking of coins being counted from one hand to another. It was a new rhythm for a new, more efficient world of exchange. Let us now picture the quiet, focused work that took place inside an early Lydian mint. The creation of the world's first coins was a hands-on, physical process, a craft that relied on a few simple tools and the steady skill of the mint worker. The process began with a blank piece of metal. This was a small, bean-shaped pellet of electrum, carefully prepared to a precise, standard weight. The blank was first heated in a small furnace until it was soft and malleable, but not molten. This gentle heating was crucial. It allowed the metal to receive a deep, clear impression without cracking. The worker, using a pair of simple tongs, would then take the glowing, warm blank and place it securely on a solid, heavy anvil. The anvil itself might have a slightly concave surface to help hold the small pellet in place. Now, the worker would take two very important tools. The first was the obverse die. This was a short, sturdy piece of hardened bronze or iron, and its bottom face was intricately engraved with the design of the lion's head. He would place this die carefully on top of the warm blank. The second tool was a simple, sturdy punch, often just a square-ended rod of rough metal. He would hold this punch firmly against the reverse side of the blank, providing a solid surface to strike, with everything held perfectly in place. A second worker would swing a heavy hammer, striking the punch with a single sharp and forceful blow. In that instant, the soft metal was squeezed between the engraved die and the rough punch, and the coin was born. The tongs would then be used to remove the newly struck coin, and the entire quiet, rhythmic process would begin again. So the minting of each coin was a deliberate three-part action: the placement of the blank, the positioning of the die and punch, and the single, decisive strike of the hammer. It was a simple but effective routine, a form of early mass production. Each coin that emerged from this process was a unique, handmade object. It carried the same official design, but with slight variations in its shape and the positioning of the strike, a quiet testament to the human hands that had crafted it. The single heavy strike of the hammer was a moment of quiet transformation. With that one forceful action, a simple, anonymous blank of metal was turned into something new. It became an object with a clear identity, a carrier of information, and a symbol of a public promise. Before this process, every piece of metal was different. Two lumps of electrum, even if they had the same weight, would have their own unique, irregular shape. They were interchangeable in value, but not in appearance. The act of striking each blank with the very same engraved die changed this completely. For the first time, all the money in a kingdom began to look the same. While the handmade nature of the coins meant each one had small imperfections, the official image of the lion was a constant and unifying feature. This uniformity was powerful. It meant that money was no longer just a raw material to be assessed. It was a standardized, manufactured object, easily recognized by all. A person no longer needed to be an expert in metals to feel confident in a transaction. They did not need to know how to use a scale or a touchstone. They only needed to be able to recognize one simple, official picture. The die impression was a visual shortcut to trust, a clear and consistent signal that the state had already done the work of weighing and testing for them. So this simple, repetitive action of striking metal with a die created a currency that was both uniform and trusted. The consistent image made the money instantly recognizable, and the authority behind that image made its value unquestionable. The coin was now more than just its weight in electrum. It was an idea, given physical form. It was a small, durable piece of a shared agreement, a quiet carrier of the public faith that allowed the world of commerce to flow with a new and gentle ease. The idea of a stamped, state-guaranteed coin was a quiet and elegant solution. It was so practical, so simple, that it did not remain a Lydian secret for long. The practice of minting coins began to spread, moving from one trading partner to the next, with a calm and steady certainty. The first people to adopt this new technology were Lydia's closest neighbors and trading partners, the Greek city-states of Ionia, located just across the Aegean Sea. These cities were centers of maritime trade, and their merchants would have seen the Lydian lion coins in the marketplaces. They would have immediately understood the convenience. No more weighing, no more testing. Just a simple, quick exchange of trusted objects. Soon, these city-states began to mint their own coins. The island of Aegina, a great sea power, was one of the very first. They used silver, which was more abundant in their lands, and they stamped their coins with the image of a sea turtle, a symbol of their maritime strength. The city of Athens followed, using the vast silver from their nearby mines to produce coins stamped with the image of an owl, the symbol of their patron goddess, Athena. Each city-state created its own unique currency, with its own specific weight standards and its own distinct and recognizable symbol. So, this simple, powerful idea began a quiet journey across the sea. The technology of minting was adopted and adapted by different cultures, each one choosing a symbol that represented its own identity and authority. A great variety of new coins began to appear in the flow of trade. The world of commerce was changing. No longer was it just the Lydian lion that simplified transactions. Now, a merchant's pouch might hold a small collection of silver turtles, owls, and other symbols. It was a new language of value, a visual conversation between independent states, all speaking in the simple, common grammar of the stamped coin. The quiet journey of the stamped coin, from Lydia to the wider Greek world, set in motion a gentle but profound change. This small, trusted object did more than just simplify individual transactions. It became the catalyst for a great and steady expansion of trade, connecting the shores of the entire Mediterranean Sea. Before coinage, long-distance trade was a slow and specialized affair. A ship's captain arriving in a foreign port faced a series of quiet challenges. The silver he carried, perhaps in the form of bars or rings, would need to be verified. He would have to find a trusted local money changer to weigh his metal and to assess its purity against the local standards. Every major transaction was a negotiation, a careful process that took time and expertise. This friction limited the scope and speed of commerce. But with the arrival of widely recognized coins like the Athenian owl or the Aeginetan turtle, this entire process changed. A ship could now arrive in a port hundreds of miles from its home, and the coins it carried would be instantly understood and accepted. A grain merchant from Egypt could sell his cargo in a Greek port for a pouch of silver owls. He did not need to have the silver weighed or tested. He could then use those same coins on the very same day to buy a shipment of local wine or olive oil to take back home. The speed of commerce increased dramatically. More ships could sail, more goods could be exchanged, and markets could grow larger and more complex. So the simple, state-guaranteed coin acted as a universal lubricant for the machinery of trade. By removing the friction of doubt and the delays of verification, it allowed the entire system to run more smoothly, more quickly, and on a much grander scale. The quiet sea lanes became busier, stitched together by the steady passage of ships. And in the holds of these ships, alongside the amphorae of oil and the sacks of grain, were small leather pouches. Inside, the stamped silver coins rested, each one a silent promise that made this new, interconnected world possible. As the practice of minting coins spread across the ancient Mediterranean, many different symbols appeared on the small discs of metal. Yet, among this growing variety, one particular coin rose to a special status. It became a benchmark for trust and value, recognized and accepted far beyond its home city. This was the silver tetradrachm of Athens. On one side, it carried the image of the goddess Athena, her helmet rendered in simple, clear detail. On the other side was her symbol, a large-eyed owl, standing beside a sprig of olive. For this reason, these coins were known everywhere simply as owls. Their great success was built on a foundation of simple reliability. The city of Athens had access to the rich Laurian silver mines, which provided a vast and steady supply of high-purity silver. The Athenian state took great care to ensure that this high quality never wavered. For nearly 200 years, the design, the weight, and the exceptional purity of the silver in the owl remained almost completely unchanged. A merchant in Egypt or Persia, picking up an Athenian owl, knew it was the same reliable object that his father and perhaps his grandfather had trusted. It was a constant in a changing world. This deep, predictable consistency was a quiet promise, kept for generations. It built an unmatched reputation that transcended borders and languages. And so, this coin became a form of international currency. Its value was guaranteed not just by the Athenian stamp, but by its long and unbroken history of consistency. The steady supply of pure silver and the unchanging familiar design made it a quiet symbol of economic stability across the entire region. Traders from distant lands would often prefer to be paid in these reliable silver owls, even over their own local currency. The small, wide-eyed bird became a universal language of value, a silent promise of fairness that helped to knit the ancient world a little more closely together. The deep and steady trust placed in the Athenian owl allowed this small silver coin to perform a new and important role. It quietly evolved from the currency of one city into the preferred money of an entire region. Imagine a contract for a large shipment of timber between a trader in Phoenicia and a shipbuilder in a Greek colony in Italy. To avoid any doubt about payment, the price would not be set in local currency. Instead, the contract would simply state a price in a specific number of Athenian owls. When the timber was delivered, payment would be made with a pouch of these familiar silver coins. There was no need for negotiation, no need for money changers or scales. The value was absolute and understood by both parties, even though they were separated by hundreds of miles of sea. The owl became the default currency for serious, large-scale business. Mercenary armies would demand their pay in owls. Kings and emperors would store their treasury reserves in the form of these reliable coins. It was a trusted way to hold wealth, because its value was recognized everywhere. Therefore, the Athenian tetradrachm grew to become a true international standard. Its predictable quality created a common financial language that simplified trade across many different cultures. It was a stable measure of value in a complex world. This one small silver coin with its unchanging design provided a quiet foundation of certainty. It allowed the intricate web of Mediterranean commerce to grow stronger and more connected than ever before. As the idea of coinage spread eastward from Lydia, it was adopted and refined by a vast and powerful new state. The Persian Empire, stretching from India to Egypt, required a sophisticated monetary system to manage its immense territory. The Persians created a clear two-tiered currency that brought a quiet order to their sprawling economy. At the top of this system was a coin of pure gold, known as the daric. This was a thick, heavy coin, weighing about 8.4 grams, and it was renowned for its exceptional purity. On its face, it carried the image of the Persian great king, often shown as an archer, running forward with a bow and spear. The daric was a coin of empire. It was used for large state payments, for funding the military, and for conducting major international trade. It was a powerful symbol of the king's wealth and authority. Alongside this prestigious gold coin, the empire also minted a silver coin, called the siglos. It was smaller than the Daric and carried the same image of the royal archer. The siglos was the workhorse of the Persian economy. It was used for paying local taxes, for buying and selling goods in the marketplaces, and for the everyday transactions of imperial life. A clear and stable exchange rate was set between the two coins. 1 gold daric was officially worth 20 silver sigloi. So, the Persians created a bimetallic system, a quiet and orderly structure with gold for large transactions and silver for daily commerce. The fixed rate between the two provided a predictable and stable foundation for the economy of their vast empire. This clear, logical system made the process of valuation simple and consistent, from the grandest palace transactions down to the purchase of a simple meal in a dusty provincial town. It was a currency designed for the steady and efficient administration of a world-spanning state. The Persian system of 2 distinct coins, one of gold and one of silver, was a quiet and practical solution to the challenges of a vast empire. By using 2 different metals, the state provided the right kind of money for every level of society, from the grandest imperial projects to the smallest market stall. This bimetallic system created a clear division of purpose. The heavy, pure gold daric was not meant for everyday use. Its great value was suited for the large-scale movements of wealth that an empire required. A provincial governor, for example, would pay his tribute to the king in gold darics. A general would receive a chest of gold to pay his entire army. It was a currency of power and administration, efficient for moving immense value over great distances. The silver siglos, however, was the coin of daily life. It was small enough in value to be practical for the routine transactions of the people. A farmer could sell his produce for a few silver coins. A craftsman could price his wares in sigloi. A traveler could buy a meal. It was the money that flowed through the local economies of the empire's many diverse lands. The true elegance of this system was the fixed and stable relationship between the two. The official rate of 1 gold daric to 20 silver sigloi acted as a steady bridge. It allowed the small transactions of the local marketplace to be seamlessly connected to the grand finances of the imperial treasury. So this dual metal currency brought a quiet and predictable order to a complex world. It provided a flexible yet stable monetary tool, perfectly scaled for both the immense needs of the state and the simple daily needs of its people. This financial structure was a reflection of the empire itself. It was a vast, unified system, but one that was built to function smoothly at every level, creating a calm and dependable economic landscape for all who lived within its borders. Tonight, we can turn our attention to the final great coinage of the ancient world. The Romans, like the Persians before them, understood the power of a single, unified currency to administer a vast and diverse territory. They developed a highly organized monetary system that became the lifeblood of their empire for centuries. The backbone of this system was a silver coin known as the denarius. First introduced during the Roman Republic, the denarius was a small, well-made coin of high-purity silver. It quickly became the standard coin for all major transactions. A soldier's monthly pay was calculated in denarii. Taxes were levied and paid in denarii. Contracts for land or goods were priced in this one, common unit. Alongside the silver denarius, the Romans also minted a gold coin called the aureus, which was worth 25 denarii, and was used for the largest state and commercial payments. For the small daily needs of the marketplace, there was a range of bronze and copper coins, like the sestertius and the as. The genius of the Roman system was not just this clear hierarchy of metals, but its sheer scale and uniformity. A vast network of official mints, from Britain to Syria, produced millions upon millions of these coins. And a denarius minted in one part of the empire was expected to have the same weight and purity as one minted 1,000 miles away. So the Romans created a single integrated monetary system that was used and trusted across their entire domain. This one currency, with its different metals for different purposes, became a powerful tool for economic and political unification. A traveler could journey from one end of the Roman world to the other, From the cool forests of Gaul to the warm deserts of Egypt, and the small collection of coins in their pouch would be understood and accepted everywhere. It was a quiet, constant reminder of the single, overarching authority that connected all these distant lands. The silver denarius was more than just a convenient object for buying and selling. For the Roman state, it was a powerful instrument, a quiet tool used to pay, supply, and connect its vast and sprawling territories. One of the most important roles of the denarius was in paying the military. The Roman army was immense, with legions stationed in permanent forts along the distant frontiers of the empire. At regular intervals, great chests of newly minted denarii would be sent from the central mints to these remote outposts. A legionary would receive his wages, a set number of these silver coins. He would then spend a portion of his pay in the local towns and villages that grew up around the forts. He would buy food, drink, and other small comforts from the local population. This simple, routine act of a soldier spending his wages was a key mechanism for the empire's economy. It steadily injected the official Roman currency into the provincial economies, which may have previously relied on barter or older, local coins. The denarius, backed by the reliability of a soldier's pay, quickly became the trusted and dominant currency in the region. This same coin would then be used by a local farmer to pay his taxes to the Roman state, completing the quiet, circular flow of money. So the denarius was the great connector. It moved from the heart of the empire to its farthest edges through the army, and in doing so it knit the diverse provincial economies into a single, unified system. This steady circulation of a trusted currency made trade between provinces simpler than ever before. It was a common financial language, a quiet token of Roman order, present in every transaction, from a soldier's simple purchase to a merchant's grandest deal. The small, flat surface of a coin was a powerful piece of public space. It was a blank canvas that passed through the hands of nearly everyone in a kingdom or empire. Rulers quickly realized that this space could be used for more than just a simple mark of guarantee. It could be used to send a quiet, constant message. The first Lydian coins bore the image of a lion, a symbol of royal power. The Athenians chose the owl, a sign of their devotion to their patron goddess. As coinage evolved, these designs became more specific and more personal. When Alexander the Great conquered his vast empire, he minted coins that bore the image of the heroic figure Heracles, a character he strongly identified with. This was a way of connecting his own rule to a legendary and divine past. Later, in the Roman Empire, this practice was perfected. Each new emperor would issue coins with his own portrait on the front. This was a remarkably efficient way to introduce his face and his authority to the farthest corners of his domain. A farmer in a remote province who would never see the emperor in person would become familiar with his image through the simple act of handling money. The back of the coin could also carry a message. It might show a picture of a newly built temple to celebrate the emperor's piety. It could depict a military victory to showcase his power. Or it could show a goddess representing peace and prosperity to highlight the stability of his reign. So the coin became a miniature monument, a small piece of state propaganda that could travel everywhere. The images stamped upon it were a quiet and constant reinforcement of the ruler's power, his legitimacy, and his connection to the gods. Every time a person made a purchase, they were not just exchanging value. They were also holding a small, official statement, a silent reminder of the authority that guaranteed the coin and that governed their world. As the practice of minting coins became more refined, they evolved from simple, functional objects into miniature works of art. The small metal dies used to strike the coins were entrusted to highly skilled artisans, who brought a new level of detail and beauty to this everyday object. In the Greek city-states, especially in places like Sicily, the artistry of coinage reached a remarkable peak. An engraver would work for weeks on a single die, carving a complex and elegant scene into the hardened bronze. A coin might feature the head of a nymph, her hair rendered in intricate, flowing curls. On the reverse, it might show a four-horse chariot, captured in a moment of dynamic, thundering motion. Each detail, from the muscles on the horses to the folds in the driver's robe, was carved with incredible precision and care. Later, Roman coin portraits became known for their striking realism. These were not idealized images, but honest and powerful representations of the emperor. The engraver would capture the exact shape of his jaw, the lines on his forehead, and the specific style of his hair. These small metal portraits are a quiet and intimate window, allowing us to see the faces of these historical figures with a clarity that is found almost nowhere else. The level of skill required for this work was immense. The entire design had to be carved in reverse as a negative image into a tiny piece of metal, often less than an inch across. So these coins were more than just money. They were a public art form, a demonstration of a state's wealth, skill, and cultural sophistication. The beauty and detail of a coin became a quiet source of civic pride. Even in the most simple, everyday transaction, a person might pause for a moment to admire the intricate work held in their hand. These small, durable objects carried not only economic value, but also a small, quiet piece of artistic mastery. The small, stamped coin was a promise. It was a guarantee from the state that it contained a specific amount of precious metal. But over time, the states that made this promise sometimes found that they needed to change the quiet reality of what was inside the coin. This was a slow and often subtle process. Imagine an emperor needing to pay for a large new army, but the state treasury did not have enough silver. The solution was a simple one of careful management. The emperor's officials would announce that all old coins must be brought to the mint to be exchanged for new ones. As the old high-purity silver coins came in, they would be melted down in large crucibles. Then, a small calculated amount of a less valuable metal, like copper, would be mixed into the molten silver. This created a new alloy that looked very similar, but contained slightly less silver in every drop. This diluted metal was then used to mint a new batch of coins. From the same amount of original silver, the mint could now produce a greater number of new coins. These new coins would have the same size, the same weight, and the same official portrait of the emperor. On the surface, they appeared identical to the old ones. So the precious metal content of the currency was quietly reduced. By mixing in a base metal, a government could stretch its existing supply of silver or gold, allowing it to mint more money to meet its expenses. The promise of the coin's stamp remained the same, but the physical substance that backed that promise had been gently and deliberately altered. The intrinsic value of the small metal disc was no longer what it once had been. The quiet change in the composition of a coin did not go unnoticed for long. While the new money looked the same and carried the same official stamp, a slow and subtle shift began to take place in the marketplaces and in the minds of the people who used it. This shift began with a simple, personal choice. A person who had two coins in their pouch, one an older coin of pure silver, and the other a newer coin with less silver, would face a quiet decision when making a purchase. They would naturally choose to spend the newer, less valuable coin. The old, pure coin would be held back, saved for a more important payment, or simply kept as a more reliable store of wealth. This simple logical act, repeated by thousands of people, meant that over time, the old, good money slowly began to disappear from daily circulation. It was hoarded, while the new, debased money was spent freely. As these newer coins became more and more common in the marketplace, merchants and craftsmen began to adjust. They knew, through experience, that these new coins contained less of the precious metal they truly valued. And so, to receive the same amount of actual silver for their goods, they would have to ask for a greater number of the new coins. The price of a clay pot, once 5 coins, might now become 6. The price of a bushel of wheat would slowly drift upwards, so the reduction in the coin's metal content had a direct and predictable effect. The better money was saved, and the lesser money circulated. In response, prices across the economy began to rise gently, to account for the new reality of the currency's true worth. The value of money was no longer a simple, fixed thing, guaranteed by the metal in the hand. It was becoming a more fluid idea, a quiet conversation between the promise of the state and the shared experience of the people in the marketplace. The slow disappearance of high-quality coins from the marketplace is a quiet and predictable pattern. It is a simple human response, a logical behavior that has been observed so often throughout history that it has been given a name. It is the simple idea that bad money drives out good. Let us imagine a system where two types of coins are officially declared to be worth the same amount. One coin, however, is made of nearly pure silver. The other, a newer issue, is made of a silver and copper alloy, but it has the same size and the same stamp. If a person has both coins and needs to buy a loaf of bread, they will almost always choose to pay with the coin that contains less silver. The pure silver coin feels more valuable. It is a better way to store wealth for the future. So the good coin, the one with the higher intrinsic value, is kept. The bad coin, the one that has been debased, is the one that is spent. Now consider the person who receives that payment. The baker now has the less valuable coin. When he goes to buy flour, he too will choose to spend that same coin and keep any better ones he may have. This process repeats itself in countless small transactions across the entire economy. The debased coins are passed from hand to hand, circulating freely. The good coins are quietly removed from the flow of commerce. They are tucked away in jars, buried in the earth for safekeeping, or melted down for their pure metal content. So when two currencies are treated as equal, but one is intrinsically more valuable than the other, the less valuable one will be the one that is used for daily transactions. The more valuable currency will slowly vanish from sight. This is not the result of any official law or decree. It is the simple, collective outcome of many individual, rational choices. It is a quiet and steady sorting process, as people naturally choose to hold on to what is real and lasting, and to part with what is less so. Tonight, we can look a little more closely at the quiet, personal act of hoarding good money. When people sense that the currency is becoming less reliable, their relationship with it begins to change. Money is no longer just a simple tool for exchange. It becomes something to be carefully sorted and evaluated. Imagine a shopkeeper at the end of a long day. He empties the small wooden box that holds his earnings onto a table. A collection of silver coins, some old and some new, lies before him in the soft lamplight. He begins a simple, practiced routine. He picks up each coin, feels its weight in his palm, and inspects its color and wear. He knows, from years of handling money, which coins are from the older, purer issues. Perhaps they have a slightly different feel, or a brighter, whiter shine. These good coins, he sets aside in a separate pile. The other coins, the newer ones that feel a little lighter, or have the duller look of a copper alloy, are placed in a different pile. The coins in the second pile are the ones he will use tomorrow, to pay his suppliers and to give his change to his customers. But the first pile, the collection of pure old silver, he will not spend. He will carefully place these coins into a small cloth bag, which he then tucks away in a hidden, secure place. Perhaps he buries it under a loose floorboard, or places it inside a hollowed-out stone in the wall. This small, hidden treasure is his real savings. It is his security for the future, a store of true and lasting value that exists outside the changing whims of the state. So, as the quality of the currency declined, two separate economies began to exist side by side. There was the visible, public economy, where the debased coins circulated freely, and there was a quiet, hidden economy, where the good money was carefully preserved and hoarded. This simple act of putting aside the best coins was a rational response to uncertainty. It was a quiet vote of no confidence in the new money, and a personal effort to hold on to something solid and dependable in a less certain world. The trust placed in a coin depended entirely on its consistency. For a currency to be accepted across a wide area, people had to believe that every coin of a certain type was just like every other. To achieve this, ancient mints developed a series of quiet, careful procedures to control the quality of their production. The first and most important step was controlling the metal itself. Before any coins were made, A large batch of gold or silver would be melted down in a crucible. A skilled refiner, known as an assayer, would then test the purity of this molten metal. He might use a touchstone or other, more complex methods involving heat and chemical reactions. Based on his findings, he would add precise amounts of a base metal, like copper, to achieve the exact, officially mandated alloy. This ensured that every coin struck from that batch of metal would have the exact same intrinsic value. The next step was to control the weight. The standardized metal was poured into molds to create coin blanks or cut from flattened sheets. These blanks were then checked for weight, one by one, against a master set of official balance weights. Blanks that were too heavy would have a tiny sliver of metal filed off the edge. Blanks that were too light would be sent back to be melted down again. Only the blanks that were of the perfect, required weight would move on to the final stage of striking. So through this slow and deliberate two-part process, the mint could guarantee both the purity of the alloy and the precise weight of each individual coin. It was a system of careful measurement and steady quality control. These quiet, repetitive routines, carried out in workshops across the ancient world, were the invisible foundation of the entire monetary system. They were the practical, hands-on work that turned a simple promise from a king or an emperor into a physical, reliable reality that people could hold in their hands. The small, stamped coin that passed from hand to hand was much more than a simple piece of metal. It was a physical representation of a society's trust in its own governing authority. The steady management of this money was one of the most important and quiet duties of the state. When a government consistently produced coins of a high and predictable quality, a sense of calm stability would settle over the economy. A farmer selling his grain knew that the silver coins he received today would buy just as much tomorrow or next year. He could plan for the future with confidence. A merchant could sign a contract for a shipment of goods to be delivered in 6 months, certain that the value of the payment he would receive was secure. This deep, unspoken trust in the currency allowed for long-term planning, for investment, and for a steady and predictable flow of commerce. But when a state began to debase its currency, this quiet confidence would slowly begin to fray. People would notice that the new coins felt different, or that prices were slowly rising. The promise stamped on the coin's face was no longer perfectly aligned with the reality of the metal it contained. This created a gentle, pervasive uncertainty. The farmer might become reluctant to sell his grain, preferring to hold on to something real and tangible. The merchant might hesitate to make long-term deals. The entire rhythm of the economy would become more cautious, more focused on the short term. So the coin in a person's pouch was a small daily referendum on the reliability of the state itself. A stable and honest currency was the mark of a stable and honest government. The management of money was a reflection of the health of the entire society. This deep, quiet connection between the integrity of a state and the integrity of its money became a fundamental truth. It was a lesson learned over and over, a steady, repeating pattern woven through the long and calm history of our economic world. The creation of a stable and predictable coinage did more than just simplify buying and selling. It also laid a quiet and sturdy foundation for a completely new kind of economic activity. For the first time, money itself could be bought and sold over time. This was the slow and steady emergence of lending and borrowing. This practice often began in a simple way, with a specialized kind of merchant known as a money changer. These individuals would set up a small table or bench in the marketplace. Their first job was to exchange the different currencies that flowed into a busy trading city. A merchant arriving from Persia with a pouch of silver sigloi could go to the money changer to exchange them for the local Athenian owls he would need for his business. The money changer, with his expert knowledge of different weight standards and purities, would perform this service for a small, agreed-upon fee. Over time, these trusted individuals, who often had a secure place to store their chests of coins, began to offer a new service. A craftsman who needed to buy a large amount of raw material to start a new project, but did not have the money on hand, could go to the money changer. He could borrow a set number of coins, with the clear and written promise to pay them back at a future date. And for the service of lending him this money, and for the risk that he might not be able to pay it back, he would agree to return not just the original amount, but a little bit extra. This small additional amount was the interest. So a stable currency made it possible to treat money as a commodity in its own right. It could be rented out for a period of time, just like a parcel of land or a draft animal. The certainty of the coin's value made it possible to make clear and predictable agreements that stretched into the future. This new practice of lending allowed for a new kind of economic growth. It was a quiet and powerful tool that allowed people to invest in their future, to start new ventures, and to build their businesses on a scale that was not possible before. In the ancient world, there were few places that offered true and lasting security. For a wealthy merchant or a landowner, the question of where to store their surplus of gold and silver coins was a constant and quiet concern. One of the most trusted and secure locations was not a private vault, but a public and sacred space. The great temples, like the Parthenon in Athens or the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, were more than just places of worship. They were massive, well-built stone structures with heavy doors and a constant staff of priests and guards. They were also seen as being under the direct protection of the gods, making them a place that few would dare to violate. Because of this deep, respected security, these temples began to serve as the world's first banks. A wealthy individual could bring a chest of coins to the temple priests for safekeeping. The priests would record the deposit in their ledgers, and the chest would be stored in the temple's secure inner treasury. The depositor could then rest easy, knowing their wealth was protected. But the priests soon realized that this great hoard of coins, sitting idle in their vaults, could be put to work. With the permission of the depositors, they began to lend out a portion of this money to others who needed it for their business ventures. They would keep careful records of these loans, and they would charge interest, which would be shared between the temple and the original depositor. So the temples became quiet centers of finance. They were trusted intermediaries, connecting those who had surplus money with those who needed to borrow it. Their sacred status provided the security and the public faith needed for this early system of credit to function. These quiet stone buildings became the still and stable heart of their city's economy. They were not just a home for the gods, but also a secure storehouse for the wealth of the community, and a silent engine for its future prosperity. With the creation of a trusted, standardized currency, a new and quiet logic entered the world of finance. It was now possible to measure the value of money, not just in the present, but also over the passage of time. This led to the simple, practical idea of charging a fee for borrowing it. Let us consider a wealthy merchant with a surplus of 100 silver coins. He has no immediate need for this money. He could simply store it securely in a chest. Or he could lend it to a ship's captain for 1 year to finance a trading voyage. But in lending the coins, the merchant takes on two quiet burdens. First, there is the risk. The captain's ship could be lost in a storm, and the money would be gone forever. Second, for the entire year that the captain has the coins, the merchant cannot use them himself. He gives up the opportunity to invest them in his own business. For these reasons, a simple agreement was made. The captain would borrow the 100 coins. And at the end of the year, upon his safe return, he would pay back not just the original 100, but an additional, pre-arranged amount. Perhaps he would return 110 coins. Those extra 10 coins were the interest. It was the agreed-upon price for the use of the money over a specific period of time. So interest was simply the price of time and risk, expressed in money. It was a predictable fee that compensated the lender for the service they provided, and for the chance they took. It turned the passive act of saving money into a potentially productive enterprise. This simple concept became a quiet engine within the economy. It allowed capital to flow from those who had it to those who could put it to productive use. The entire system rested on the simple, shared trust in the value of the coins themselves, and the certainty that they would be worth the same a year from now. The quiet practice of lending money at interest did more than help individual craftsmen. It provided a steady and predictable way to fund large, long-term projects that would have otherwise been impossible. This new financial tool began to reshape the world in a very physical way. Imagine a group of merchants in a busy port city. They see a clear need for a new, larger stone pier in the harbor to accommodate more ships. But no single merchant has enough silver to pay for the stonemasons, the laborers, and the vast quantities of materials required. The project is simply too big for any one person to fund. So they form a partnership and create a careful, detailed plan. They take this plan to the city's great temple, which holds many large deposits of wealth. They present their case. And after some deliberation, the temple agrees to lend them a very large sum of silver coins. With this borrowed capital, they can now hire the workers and begin the slow, steady work of construction. The project takes 2 full years to complete, but once the new pier is finished, it begins to generate a quiet, steady income. Every ship that uses the new facility to load and unload its cargo pays a small fee. Over the next several years, this stream of small payments is collected. It is used to pay back the temple, covering not just the original loan, but also the agreed-upon interest. And so, the simple mechanism of a loan, with its predictable interest, allowed for the pooling of many small resources to achieve a great goal. It enabled the financing of ambitious projects that benefited the entire community. It was a quiet tool that transformed idle savings into tangible, useful structures, like buildings, bridges, and harbors. This new financial system changed the very landscape of the ancient world. It allowed societies to think and plan on a grander scale, to build for the long term, and to undertake projects that would serve generations to come. The quiet clinking of coins was now joined by the steady sounds of construction, building a more complex and prosperous future. The stamped coin, in its quiet journey from hand to hand, began to work a slow and subtle change. It was a change not in the marketplace, but in the mind. The very idea of what money was started to separate from the physical substance that it was made from. In the beginning, the value of a piece of silver was the silver itself. It was a tangible commodity, and its worth was confirmed by its physical weight on a scale. But the arrival of a state-guaranteed coin introduced a new and powerful idea. A person accepting a Roman denarius began to think less about the specific weight of silver in their hand. They began to think more in terms of the coin's official name, the denarius. The name of the coin became the unit of account. A loaf of bread did not cost a certain weight of silver. It cost a certain number of coins. This shift was most clear when a state began to debase its currency. A newer coin might contain less silver than an older one, but the state still declared that both were worth 1 denarius. And for a time, people would accept this. The value was now partly a social agreement, a shared trust in the official stamp, not just a physical reality of the metal. The promise of the coin's stamp and the substance within it were beginning to drift apart, and so money was becoming more abstract. Its value was slowly migrating from the intrinsic worth of the commodity to the authority of the institution that issued it. The coin was becoming a trusted token, a symbol that represented value, rather than being the value itself. This was a quiet but essential conceptual leap. It was the slow, steady process of untethering the idea of money from a physical object. The stage was being set for an even greater leap of faith, for a future in which money might have no intrinsic value at all. As trust in institutions like temples and money changers grew, a new and even more abstract form of money began to take shape. It was a quiet innovation that allowed wealth to move from one person to another without a single physical coin ever leaving the vault. Let us imagine 2 merchants who both keep their surplus silver coins stored for safekeeping in the same large city temple. The first merchant buys a shipment of olive oil from the second merchant and owes him a payment of 100 silver coins. Instead of going through the slow and cumbersome process of withdrawing the heavy coins, carrying them across the city, and having the second merchant then redeposit them, a much simpler method was used. The first merchant would simply write a note, a kind of formal instruction, and send it to the temple priests. The priests, upon receiving the note, would open their large, heavy ledger book. In this book, they kept a careful running account for every person who deposited money with them. The priest would take his pen, dip it in ink, and make two simple entries. On the page for the first merchant, he would subtract 100 coins from his balance. Then, he would turn to the page for the second merchant and add 100 coins to his balance. And with that, the transaction was complete. The debt was paid. The wealth had been transferred. And yet, not a single coin had moved. So wealth could now exist as a simple entry in a trusted book. The transfer of value became an act of information, a quiet and orderly adjustment of written records. The physical money remained still and secure in the treasury, while its ownership flowed freely through the city. This was perhaps the most profound step so far in our journey. The idea of money was now almost completely detached from the object of the coin itself. It was becoming pure information, a system of credits and debits, resting on a foundation of shared, quiet trust in the accuracy of the bookkeeper. Our long and quiet journey has now reached a calm resting place. We can look back and see how the simple, stamped coin was the elegant answer to a series of persistent challenges that had slowed the pace of human exchange for centuries. First, it solved the fundamental problem of barter. In a world of direct trade, a person with grain had to find someone who not only wanted grain, but who also had something to offer that the first person needed. This search for a perfect match was slow and inefficient. The coin, as a universally accepted third commodity, dissolved this problem completely. The farmer could sell his grain to anyone for coins, with the quiet confidence that those coins could then be used to buy anything he needed from anyone else. Next, it solved the problems of portability and divisibility that plagued earlier forms of commodity money. A cow could not be easily divided to buy a loaf of bread. A sack of salt was heavy and cumbersome. The coin, small, durable, and produced in a range of standard sizes, was the perfect solution. A person could carry a great deal of value in a small pouch, and the system of different denominations made it simple to pay for any item, large or small. Finally, and most importantly, it solved the quiet, constant problem of trust. A lump of raw silver had to be weighed and tested for purity at every single transaction. The state-guaranteed stamp on a coin removed this burden entirely. The image of the ruler, or the symbol of the city, was a complete and instant guarantee of both weight and quality. And so this one small object was a masterclass in quiet efficiency. It was an elegant, multi-purpose tool that served as a reliable store of value, a consistent unit of account, and a convenient medium of exchange, all at once. With these ancient problems now solved, a new foundation of trust was laid. The simple, stamped coin was the steady, dependable bedrock upon which the entire, complex structure of our modern economic world would slowly and calmly be built. As our quiet journey comes to a close, we can see that the small, metal coin of the ancient world was much more than a simple tool. It was the physical embodiment of a set of powerful ideas. And these quiet, foundational principles, established so long ago, continue to shape the very nature of our money today. The most important of these ideas is that money is a form of shared trust. The stamp of the Lydian lion was a promise, a guarantee of value from the king. The trust was placed not just in the metal, but in the authority that stood behind it. Today, our money is based on this very same principle, in a more abstract form. A modern banknote is a piece of paper or polymer with very little intrinsic worth. A number in a digital account is just information. Their value comes entirely from our shared, collective confidence in the institution that issues them. The promise has been separated from the precious metal, but the fundamental need for a trusted guarantor remains exactly the same. The ancient coin also established the idea that money is a unit of account, a common language for value. This, too, continues. We still measure the worth of all things, from our labor to our homes, in the common language of our currency. The names have changed, from the denarius to the dollar, but the function is identical. And so, the quiet evolution we have traced is a journey from the tangible to the abstract. It is the slow and steady transfer of value from a physical commodity, like a lump of silver, to a shared and trusted social agreement. The forms have changed, from metal to paper to digital light, but the underlying principles remain. The entire global economy still runs on this simple, ancient foundation of a common measure of value and a deep, quiet trust in a shared promise. It is an idea that was first given form in a small, metal disc thousands of years ago, and it continues to flow silently through our world, connecting us all in a calm and steady stream of exchange.